Hello, my name is Battalion Chief Don Novak with the Elmhurst Fire Department. Did you know that over 85% of the child passenger safety seats are installed incorrectly? Here at the Elmhurst Fire Department, we offer a free child passenger safety seat inspection. All you need to do is call City Hall at area code 630-530-3090 for an appointment. Area code 630-530-3090. Because we care about your children.
Visit Elmhurst.org to explore the new City of Elmhurst website. Find out the latest Elmhurst news, pay utility bills and parking tickets, report concerns, and much more. Elmhurst.org is an ideal way to discover what Elmhurst offers your business, your family, your life.
This is Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels, your host, and tonight I'm delighted to have the new mayor of Elmhurst, Steve Morley, as my guest. And Steve, welcome to Elmhurst Now. And you're 2 months from your election, 1 month from starting your term of office. But I'm wondering, for purposes of starting us off here this evening, if you could share some of your family's long history with our community.
I'd be happy to, Ken. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, and I too am delighted to be sitting here with you today. I grew up in Elmhurst, over in Brenhaven, behind Edison School, attended the local schools here. My father actually used to work for Elmhurst College. I attended Edison, Sandburg, York High School, went on to the University of Iowa, where I got my economics degree. I came back to the area and got my first job was a marketing job, and that's where I met my wife, Nancy. We live here in town, over near Jefferson School, with our 3 kids, Reed, Jeanette, and Anna. They recently graduated or finished school. My youngest will be in 7th grade next year, and then that's Anna. Jeanette will be a freshman, and Reed is a sophomore. I am the president of Elmhurst-based Marketing Resources, a promotional marketing company in the north end of town, and I'm thrilled to be able to call Elmhurst our home.
Can you share a little bit also about your public service history? I know 6 years as the 6th Ward Alderman. Anything before that?
Sure, a little bit. Most of it really starts when the kids are born and you get involved in a lot of activities. I was with the Jefferson PTA. I did the requisite baseball coach, soccer coach, basketball coach. I've also had an opportunity, one of my neighbors is Mike Laspiza. He runs the Kickoff for Kids charity in town. And I've had an opportunity to work with them and also with ECAF. And then more recently, I deliver food for United Community Concerns, and also currently I'm a volunteer for DuPage Pads. And I've been doing that for I'd say about 10 years or so, before I decided to run for alderman 6 years ago.
Now, how'd you get involved with pads? I hadn't heard that before.
Well, I was aware of pads, but my good friend Alderman Chris Healy, he and I, about once every 3 weeks, do the midnight shift, or it's actually, I think it's 2 to 5 in the morning. I was aware of it through our church, but had never actually volunteered. And, I don't think there's a big list of people lining up for the 2 a.m. shift. So when Chris Healy called, I said, sure, I'll give it a shot.
Okay. Well, 6 years as an alderman, obviously the family adjusts to the demands of the phone ringing, and when things aren't right, and maybe when things are right for that matter too. But can you walk me through what had to be an interesting moment or conversation, or what was the process that leads Steve Morley to decide to run for mayor?
That's an interesting question. As you're aware, we had a mayor, Pete DeCiani, and I really hadn't thought much about running for mayor. Pete was in his first term, but then he decided to run for county board. Ultimately, he threw his hat in the ring and he won. So last February, March, when the primary happened, and it was evident that Pete certainly had won the primary enough to get into the race, and he looked like a pretty strong front runner. That's when the conversation around town started to happen. A little bit of chatter, and then being an alderman, you're in tune with those folks. Those people are asking questions. Hey, are you interested in running? What do you think of so-and-so running? And I've got a lot of great friends, not only in town and leaders in town, but friends on city council. So there was a lot of conversation to be had with those types of folks, and ultimately decided to run.
Okay, that's one part of the process, but the process of suddenly now you're invited to every public event on the planet, at least in the planet as it relates to Elmhurst, in addition to the real work and the balance between family, service, business, community, faith, fill in all those blanks. That's got to be quite a bit different for everybody.
It is. It's a lot of hard work. Honestly, I haven't figured it out just yet, only being in the job for about a month. But what I found is that a lot of it is my own personal time that I sacrifice or that I use up. You learn during the campaign you can squeeze what you can squeeze into an 18-hour day and how much work you can get done. So the campaign is so much work and so much effort that it allows you to at least prioritize. And now that I'm mayor, at least I have a little more control of my schedule. So I use some of those learnings, but really it is balancing my personal time. So I get up in the morning a little bit earlier. I try to go to City Hall in the morning 3-4 times a week before the workday really starts. And then the other challenge really with having 3 young kids is all of the, whether it's a baseball game or dancing or swimming or all these other events, we started during the campaign having a family calendar. And boy, that's something that you really have to keep up to date. And for the most part, it works terrific. But there's occasion where either I'll call my wife or she'll call me and she'll say, wait, that wasn't on the calendar. And it's just something you have to deal with. But we get it done. It's a little bit of a challenge, but we get it done.
Let's go back to that election, if you will. Turns out on election night, you get roughly 43% of the vote, win rather handily. I don't think anyone necessarily, the candidates expect to win because that's what it's all about. But at the same time, afterwards, you were quoted as like, almost being surprised in the sense of, gosh, I actually did win. But the campaign itself, what did you learn going through that process?
Well, first I would say, as it relates to my family, before I had made the decision to run for mayor, certainly they were aware of a lot of the conversations that I was having with friends. We had more than a few family meetings about whether or not Dad was going to run. And I'll say this, they all decided that they would support me to run for mayor before I had even decided. So ultimately,
good for them.
Which was great. I mean, it was great that they were supportive, and it put the question right back on me. It wasn't so much me asking the kids, hey, do you think Dad should run? Yeah, you should run. So it actually came back on me to make that decision. So it was great to have them behind me. And your question about the campaign?
Just what do you learn when you're walking the streets and if you walk in the streets for 18 hours or how many hours it turned out to be?
What's interesting is that you get to know every little nook and cranny of Elmhurst. Certainly you've got the map on the wall and you have every single precinct and every single street and where you've walked and where you haven't walked. Campaigning is a lot of hard work. The best part about it, without question, the best part about it, and the part where when I needed a break from the campaign, is I would actually go walk and knock on doors and talk to the residents. If I was having a bad day and you're working on campaign mailers or you're working on speeches and you've got just this unreal schedule, but it was the times where I could take the time out of that craziness and put the phone away and go door to door, which was really the best part of the campaign. You learn a little bit about yourself. You learn a whole lot about the residents of Elmhurst. And, growing up in town, I chose to make Elmhurst my home because I think it's fantastic. And we have 43,000 other people who feel the same way. They all have their individual opinions when you see them door to door, but it's really was the best part of the campaign for me.
Now, for those who might be watching that don't know this, the mayor of Elmhurst is a quote-unquote part-time position. It's the city manager, mayor form of government. But that part-time official status versus what it actually turns out to be. We happened to chat a few days ago, and you shared that it's just unbelievable the amount of information that comes to the attention of the mayor of Elmhurst. Is that fair? Is it right? Are the expectations too high, do you think? And I know you're only a month into it.
I can say this, and you mentioned that we're a city manager form of government, and a lot of people don't know that. I think there's 5 or 6 different types of municipal government allowed by Illinois law, and the city manager form of government is the most prevalent one, and that is where we actually hire basically a professional CEO to run the town, to do the day-to-day operations. And that's our city manager, Jim Grabowski. He took over for Tom Borchert, who worked at the city for over 40 years and city manager, I think, around 28. So he had some big shoes to fill, but Jim's the day-to-day guy. He is the CEO of this town we call Elmhurst, and he does a fantastic job. And then there's the mayor. The mayor is kind of the political side of it, the liaison with a lot of other towns and businesses in town. There is an unbelievable amount of information that I get almost on a daily basis. You and I chatted about it before. I kind of blame Tom Marcucci for taking a part-time job and turning it into a full-time job, because certainly there's no lacking for the amount of work or effort you can put in. But certainly the pay isn't there, and I have a full-time job that I need to keep going with. But as mayor, I think it's going to take a little bit of a balance on that. In addition to, let's just say, a 40 or 50 hour a week job if I'm lucky, the mayor side of it can easily be an additional 30 hours. And that's a lot of work. But if you rely, I personally, in the short amount of time I have, we have a great staff at City Hall. I rely on city staff to be as productive as possible. And then my fellow aldermen have been terrific, and I rely on them a lot to get a lot of the work done.
It's a strong city council, and as I view it, it was strong when you were on it. It remains strong.
That was one of the reasons why I actually ultimately decided to run for mayor, is that I really felt that we did have a strong city council, and there's a lot of opportunity in Elmhurst, and I think with a good city council, which is where the legislative power in town really resides, with a good city council, I think we can get a lot done.
Yeah, former Mayor Marcucci used to get quoted all the time as saying, "I don't even get to vote most of the time." So the power of the office, if you will, is in the orchestration of what's on the agenda and how the discussions go and what goes forward and what doesn't. You have a leadership style? Do you have a style that you feel works best for Steve Borley?
Well, it's one that I actually brought with me from my job. As I mentioned before, I'm the president of an Elmhurst-based marketing company, and I manage 5 different departments within that company, with dozens of people underneath each one of those. And as a leader, I think it's important to set the goals or set the vision, and then make sure that you've got good people to support you and to carry that out. I'm really not what you'd call a micromanager. A good example would be seating committees. So not a lot of people know all of the structure in our government, but we have 14 aldermen, and we meet twice a month as city council, but we also meet twice a month in our individual committees. We have finance, DP, and development planning and zoning, public works, and public affairs and safety. And one of the few roles that the mayor has that's in our code is to set those committees with advice and consent of council. And I just recently set the committees, and I had to select chairman for each one of the committees. And I was fortunate enough to have been on the city council for the past 6 years, and I knew, with the exception of one new alderman, I knew all of the aldermen that I was dealing with, and aldermen that I trust and had worked with in the past. So I took the opportunity to make a couple of changes at the leadership level, but I have a lot of faith in the chairman that I put in place and the vice chairman who support them. And I sit down with them and I talk to them periodically about what's important and what's in front of their committees. But Jim Kennedy, for example, is the head of public works, and he's got a big job ahead of him with some of the challenges we faced with flooding. But Jim's been in that position for 4 years. I grew up with Jim. I've known Jim since 5th grade. But he's one where we'll have a conversation about what needs to happen, the end goal, but we don't necessarily figure out how we're going to get from point A to point B. I could spend all of my time trying to figure that out, but if you have good people in certain positions and you trust them and they have the right support, they're going to get that done. And that's the kind of leadership style I think you'll see out of me. I like to have consensus, and once we have that consensus and we all know what the goal is, the common goal, then we move forward.
Do you have a timetable for your successor in the 6th Ward?
Well, by state statute, I have 60 days, which would be a replacement. So when I was sworn in May 6th, I automatically left the 6th Ward spot open. So I have until July. But my intent is to have that person, and it's one of those advice and consent of council. So I've been interviewing folks, and my hope is to offer somebody up or present a candidate to the city council by our next meeting, which would be the 17th.
How has been the interaction with other mayors around Elmhurst? Is there a high level of interaction between the mayors?
Well, there are a lot of mayor-type conferences and meetings that happen, and those are very valuable. There's DuPage mayors and managers and Suburban O'Hare Commission and stuff like that. In fact, recently, Dan Cronin, chairman of DuPage County Board, actually hosted a breakfast for a lot of the new mayors. There was a lot of turnover in new mayors in DuPage County. And what's very interesting is there's certain things that you share or responsibilities that are asked of you in an executive role. And those are things that I can't go to my fellow or my prior fellow aldermen and ask their opinion. How would you handle this? Or, how have you handled this type of situation? So it's very helpful to me to talk to other mayors and village managers and people like that. Here's a challenge we're facing, whether it's flooding or it's revenue or development. And they talk about how they've tackled that specific challenge in their role in that executive position. So it's been very helpful. In a very short amount of time, I've probably had the opportunity to meet with maybe 15 individual mayors from around the area, whether it's just casually or through meetings or conferences, and it's very helpful.
Is there a orientation? I mean, okay, you get elected mayor, and there's a few weeks before you take office, and the former mayor, in this case, interim mayor Scott Levin, but is there a process by which, is it an orientation that you structure around your needs, or is it an orientation that finds you?
Well, there's no formal orientation, I can tell you that. It's kind of funny, I've been around City Hall for 6 years, but you don't have an office there as an alderman. You get a mailbox. As mayor, you walk in, you've kind of got this office, and you've got a conference room attached to it, and you've got this inbox that, if you don't pay attention, stacks up pretty quickly. So I'm constantly asking city staff, now, what am I doing with this, and when's my next meeting, and is this something I normally sign, or is this something I hand off? So city staff has been very helpful, and then the former mayors, Tom Marcucci, Pete DeCiani, and Scott Levin, have all been very helpful. Scott Levin, in a very short amount of time, 4.5 months, I told him, created some very big shoes to fill. I think he did a fantastic job, but also former Mayor Pete DeCiani and Tom Marcucci. Tom says to think of him as a reference guide or a reference manual. He's a book like a thesaurus that's on a shelf, and he'll stay up there until you need him, but if you want, you can pull that book down and ask him a question.
Big book.
Big. In Tom's case, it's a 16-year tome.
That's right.
And Tom's a bit of a shrinking violet, so sometimes it's tough to get the answer out of him.
Yeah, right.
But he's been very helpful. So there have been plenty of times where I've called the former mayors. I'm fortunate to have 3 of them, a phone call away. How did you handle this? How did you handle that? And they'll give me the inside information. It helps. It's very helpful.
Last question before we take a short break. You can anticipate being mayor, but then suddenly you are mayor. What's the difference?
You had mentioned that there was the election, and then there was about a 3-week off period, and then actually becoming mayor. Unfortunately, we had a flood in the meantime. But I would say what's interesting is, as an alderman, you're on the inside, you get to understand the inner workings of City Hall, but there's a certain level of anonymity that comes with being an alderman. But as the mayor, there is no level of anonymity. When people usually have a problem or an issue, they want to go to the top anyway and ask the question. So that's been a little bit of an adjustment for me. Simply just walking downtown Elmhurst, either running into people, and it can be very complimentary. People I don't know saying, hey, great job the other day at the Memorial Day Parade, or, oh, hey, Mayor, I had a question for you. And really the anonymity walking downtown Elmhurst kind of goes away, which is great. It's what I signed up for. Ultimately, it's great to have that kind of interaction with the residents of Elmhurst.
We're talking with Steve Morley, the mayor of Elmhurst, about a month or so now. And we'll take a short break and be right back. Welcome back to Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels, and we're spending some time with the mayor of Elmhurst, Steve Morley. And Steve, in this part of the show, I would like to kind of project forward a little bit. You're starting out as mayor, but with a rich history of 6 years of city leadership as 6th Ward alderman. But you ran with some specific objectives, and among them would be priority number 1 would be what?
Priority number 1, I think, in my opinion, is revenue for the city of Elmhurst. There's a lot of people with a lot of great ideas, and there's a lot of services that the city provides to its citizens. But without the proper revenue and without an attention to grow that revenue on a regular basis, you're going to put yourself in a position where you may end up cutting some of those services that people find valuable. If you can create a good economic engine for the city and create that revenue, then the sky's the limit. You've got, as we mentioned, 14 other aldermen and a city staff of almost 300 that can figure out what to do with that revenue in terms of providing services to the residents. But without that revenue and without paying attention to that, you're going to get in trouble.
Revenue is better than it's been, partly the economy, partly Elmhurst, quite frankly, which fared better than some of the communities around us did, even at the height of what they now call the Great Recession. But there are some opportunities that are percolating and moving forward. The first one that comes to mind is the North York TIF, TIF 4, but the North York TIF. Anchored already by Mariano's, which should be open shortly. Your thoughts on that TIF? It's a long one, it's a big one, it's by far the biggest TIF in Elmhurst, but we've had good success with TIFs.
Elmhurst has a good track record as it relates to TIFs. We have 3 other TIFs, as you mentioned. All 3 of those TIFs will expire within the next 9 years. When I was an alderman, I was chairman of the Development Planning and Zoning Committee, and it actually started with the EDC, the Elmhurst Economic Development Commission, trying to figure out what we could do in town in Elmhurst to help boost some of that development. And ultimately it went from the EDC to the Development Planning and Zoning Committee, of which I was the chairman. We spent collectively almost 18 months analyzing various places in town and various economic tools we could use. Ultimately we did decide on a TIF. It's the largest TIF, but as it relates to the overall EAV in Elmhurst, it's a fraction. It's about 2.4%. But the TIF itself, I think, is a fantastic idea. The areas that we identified as what we'll call the North York TIF, we're actually lagging at a rate of almost 1 to 3 in terms of just regular commercial appreciation. So basically what that means is if a property in another commercial area of town was appreciating at, let's just say, $10,000 a year, that same property in this TIF area was appreciating at $3,000 a year, ultimately creating an imbalance where some of the more healthier parts of town ended up subsidizing from a tax standpoint that TIF area. So it was, after 18 months of study, this was the area that we selected where we could focus on commercial development, and I think it's fantastic. As you mentioned, I've been in town 45 years, and for the most part, there has been limited growth. And the North York TIF, for people who don't know, is basically from Hamburger Heaven, right there at York and North Avenue, all the way up to Grand Avenue, both sides. I think it's a great opportunity. The former mayor, Pete DeCiani, was instrumental in really anchoring that TIF with Mariano's, new grocery store that'll open up this summer. Not only did they improve a property that was vacant, but they're going to bring somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 jobs into town. And that's a great way to kick off a TIF. So I think that the possibilities are really endless up there. We've got the former, I'll call it the Holiday Inn, it's the Waverton. Right now, there's developers calling us about redeveloping that property. So Mariano's was great to get in, and it's just the beginning.
Well, and it's such an interesting TIF, too, when you consider, as you just said, from Hamburger Heaven to the 290 extension is almost an extension of city center retail. And then you go on the other side of the expressway and you immediately come to the Waverton property and Mariano's, and then it's a mixed circumstance the rest of the way up York, including some residential properties. So it's an interesting TIF from a planning standpoint, and I know that currently there's a RFP in play for but a plan as it relates to how TIF 4 will mature.
It's qualified as a conservation TIF, and really that TIF's identified specifically for mature towns like Elmhurst. We're not getting any bigger. We can't annex the next farm. We're a town that's close to 175 years old, and this is really about redevelopment. You've got properties in there that are 50, 60, 70 years old, and those properties can be obsolete for some of the demands of the current marketplace. So that's another reason why we're looking forward to doing this. But also in a mature community, you've got almost what you would consider a piano key type of lots that are up there. So you've got, a hot dog stand next to a car wash, next to, a used car lot.
Right.
And sometimes, and we love every business that's up there, but there's some businesses that maybe are on York Road frontage that could operate equally successful on maybe more of an industrial drive, whereas you might want to bring a retail business to that York Road frontage and take advantage of that traffic, where there's some businesses that don't depend on that traffic, where they're a destination. So there's a million different ways we can take this. As you mentioned, we recently went out for bid for an agency to help us plan how we're going to pursue businesses for that area. That should be done, I would say, in the next 2-3 months, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results.
The Hahn Street property, which was formerly in the first TIF, the City Center TIF, was moved into TIF 4 so that the city would have an opportunity to extend the life of the whatever winds up going there. Now I know Hahn Street has had an interesting history, to say the least, but what's the current status as you and I are conversing?
Well, and that's interesting. Hahn Street does have a long, and let's just call it a colorful history. In fact, Hahn Street, there was a proposal on the drawing board for Hahn Street to be built, development to be built there before I was even an alderman. That was 6 years ago. We've been acquiring property. The city has been pulling together property for, I want to say, 12 years. We ultimately did get a development and agreement, but then really the financial marketplace took a drop in 2008, and ultimately the deal didn't make sense either for the developer or for the city of Elmhurst. But most recently, there were 10 properties, 10 parcels that the city acquired. Just in the last month, the city finalized its contract with the last puzzle piece, I'll call it, and that's the Pauli gas station. We struck a deal with the Pauli family where they will continue to operate their service area of that gas station. But ultimately, come next March, the city will control the property, and we're in the process of developing an RFP, which is really it's a big document that between city staff and the city council, we've developed what we think we want to see in that area, and that will be going out in the next 2 weeks. It's got some retail components we're asking for. Retail components, a lot of parking. Elmhurst can always use a lot of parking, and then some sort of residential component, but there are parts of the RFP that allow for flexibility. So if a developer comes in and has even a better idea or a different interesting idea, we're more than willing to listen to it. So that's the current status. The RFP should go out in the next 2 weeks, and we're looking forward to the responses. I think we sent out over 100, close to 100 last time, and that was 6-7 years ago. We have been contacted by over 20 individual developers before we even sent the RFP out. So we're expecting a good response, and this is really what I consider the creative part of the process, where we're going to get, let's just say it's 25 different ideas that come through our door, and each one of them is going to be different. And it's going to be up to them to sell us on the idea and make one that makes financial sense both for the developer but also for the city.
One of the great positives from an economic development standpoint for the city is the incredibly diverse and the really large number for a city our size of economic areas. I mean, City Center, Spring Road, York and Villette, York and Butterfield, St. Charles and Route 83, North and Route 83, North York, Grand Avenue, Lake Street, 3 business parks. As we kind of emerge from the recession, and we're definitely still emerging. There's some businesses that are clearly beyond it and others that are just starting to come out of it. Where do you see the opportunities? What's going to pop, do you think, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I do think that really the TIF area, and we started that TIF, I said we went through about an 18-month process. We looked at 12 different locations, narrowed it down from 12 to 9 to 3, and ultimately we chose the North York TIF. We felt that that was the one that was most ripe, but that doesn't mean that we're ignoring the other parts of town. You've got the Spring Road Business District and the Villette Business District, and they're all doing quite well. So I think that, and there's also other opportunities that we can, or other tools we can take advantage of to bring businesses in that aren't just in the TIF area. But specifically, I think our focus is going to be the commercial areas of that North York TIF. That's where I think we'll say the low-hanging fruit is in the short term. The other thing I'll mention about that TIF, and you mentioned it earlier, is that we have 3 successful TIFs. TIFs can be a very complicated tool, and they do have a high impact on our fellow taxing bodies, most specifically the schools and the parks, along with some of the others. But I'm very happy to say that as part of this North York TIF, we, the City of Elmhurst, were able to structure a revenue sharing agreement with the schools, and we just actually passed one last night, very similar to the park districts. And it's the most advanced and progressive revenue sharing agreement in the state of Illinois. And that's just the kind of town that Elmhurst is. Ultimately, it's going to be a win-win for all of those fellow taxing bodies, where we're going to generate more money for those fellow taxing bodies during the life of the TIF than if we hadn't done it at all.
Yeah, I think that was hailed by both parties as an outstanding example, once again, of community cooperation and looking at the big picture. You mentioned in the first half of the program flooding, and obviously the city's past has several events that anyone 45 years you've seen all the big ones. What's the status of? I mean, and it's a massive project and it's all over town, but where are we right now in terms of process?
Well, flooding is a problem that I don't think we're ever going to solve 100%, but there are certain steps we can take. And it's one of the things you had mentioned, some of the things during my campaign, what was my focus.
Right.
One was economic development, because that's going to create the revenue that I mentioned. The other big issue was infrastructure, and specifically our infrastructure as it relates to flooding and protecting our residents' homes. So right now, and this started with the previous administration with Pete DeCiani, we had a couple of large floods. It's becoming the norm now. That we're getting large floods, it seems, every 1 year to 18 months. And these are significant floods of over 7 inches of rain in less than 24 hours. We have spent approximately $1 million doing a very comprehensive evaluation of the topography of Elmhurst and what options are available to us. And we're working with one of the top engineering firms in the state of Illinois. And most recently, they have come up with 9 individual projects that can be considered within the city of Elmhurst that can be used for flood detention. And those are areas that during a flood or during an event where we're getting a lot of rain can hold back water for a specific amount of time and really allow the Elmhurst system to catch up. And we're just now getting into that process. We've got some architectural drawings. The locations that have been identified some are on school property, some are on Park District property. Ultimately, the way I look at it is it's on the Elmhurst residents' property. They own the property. And we're taking a look at what improvements can be made to those locations, still keep them functional. For example, take a soccer field. Well, we might have the opportunity to take a soccer field and lower it 10, 15 feet, and that soccer field now can store 20 acre feet of water. And it's millions and millions and millions of gallons that normally would be absorbed by the system. If we can find a way to have that water detained for, let's just say, 24 to 48 hours and allow it slowly to trickle into the system, that's going to be a help. So right now we're in the process of analyzing those 9 areas in town, working with our fellow boards, both the Park District and the school board. We've supplied them with copies of this. We're actually going to their next 2 board meetings and doing full stormwater flood mitigation presentations and hosting a Q&A. So, former Tom Marcucci used to say, one of his sayings, and he had a lot of them, was, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. And that's what we're doing. We're chipping away at this. We're moving as fast as we can. I have told my fellow aldermen and the committeemen that this is a priority. We've done a year and a half, 2 years of planning and evaluation, and now we're being presented with some of the tools and options, and we need to evaluate those tools and start constructing those projects.
Well, and in my world at least, Steve, the credibility of this city in responding when, for those of us who were in town in '87 and saw what happened then, and then to have the city respond the way they did, and essentially to have the problems of '87 no longer problems, the credibility is very high on the search for solutions.
Well, the city has been successful, and you learn something with every flood. You certainly hope it doesn't flood, but you take the learnings from every flood and you add them. So one of the things that we did, and the last flood was April 18th, and I was mayor-elect at the time. I hadn't been sworn in, and Scott Levin was still the mayor, and we spent probably collectively 20 hours that day working on the issue. And one of the biggest things we did was communication, and that is the constant communication out to the residents of Elmhurst about what we're doing and what new information is available. And that's something that I think is key. That's something I want to continue as I, continue to be mayor, is to keep that communication open and try to educate the residents of Elmhurst where they can go and get that information. One of the things, and I've been mentioning this in almost every public opportunity I've had to speak, is the city has a program called Notify Me. And you can go on the city website and you can sign up for Notify Me, either via phone, text, or email. And the city is constantly issuing press releases and informational emails about what's coming next. So for example, when the flood came, there was various different garbage pickups and dates, and we had to move some dates. And that's something that if you were on the Notify Me program, you would get those emails and get that information. So we're constantly trying to do that, get that information out to residents. In addition to robocalls is another example. Most people don't like robocalls because they're usually political. But we've turned that around a little bit, and we're doing robocalls that are informational, and that's been very well received.
Last question. The city of Elmhurst has been described by many as greater than the sum of its parts, and the way that's defined is, we've got a new hospital, strong economic business districts, a college, a great school system, both public and parochial, park district, library. There's just so many things, and then you throw in a very rich heritage dating back to 1836. People really like this town, and always have. As a lifelong resident, why do you think that is? I mean, it's all those things, but it's something else too.
Well, I can tell you this. I would say that it's a little stronger than that. People love this town. And what's surprising, it's a town of 44,000, 43,000 people, but you really get the impression that you know everybody, or you're one degree of separation from somebody else. And I can tell you this, and there's so many of my peers growing up in town who now have chosen to, they've gotten married, they have kids, and they're raising a family in town. And I can tell you my personal feeling growing up in town, you were a bike ride away from anything you wanted. It was just such a warm community. And I know, and I've talked to friends of mine who've grown up in town and have chosen to stay here, is that this is the kind of town where you grew up in, and you hope someday you would be fortunate enough to come back and raise a family there. And I have other friends and friends I met at college and business friends who talk about, boy, when I grew up, I couldn't wait to get out of my town. And there's just a different feeling in Elmhurst. You grow up in this town, there's one of the things I learned on the campaign, or just reconfirm what I already knew, is there's a fierce pride in this town. And you grow up in this town, and there's a big part of you who thinks it's a great town, you love to raise your kids here. And it's just the way Elmhurst is, and it is. It's the sum of everything that you add up that makes it a fantastic town.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I thank you for spending time on Elmhurst Now, and wish you every success in your term ahead, and look forward to watching you and the agenda for the city overall.
Well, thanks for having me here, Ken, and giving me an opportunity to share some of my insights about Elmhurst.
You've been hearing from Mayor Steve Morley. This has been Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels. Good night.
The Elmhurst Historical Museum, located in downtown Elmhurst, is proud to present award-winning exhibits for visitors of all ages. Our Adult Tea Time Talk series, family programs, and special events make learning about history interesting and fun. Admission is free, and on-site parking is available. Visit the Elmhurst Historical Museum soon. Call us today or go to our website for the latest program details.
Hi, I'm John Quigley, President and CEO of the Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In these challenging economic times, it's imperative that our residents and businesses band together to not only shop Elmhurst, but buy Elmhurst whenever possible. We have great stores in our city center, Spring Road, Butterfield Road, York and Villette Streets, St. Charles and Route 83, North Avenue and Lake Street, along North York and even Grand Avenue. I ask for your help. Let's keep our tax dollars in Elmhurst.
We live in some of the best communities in Illinois. We care about our neighbors. We work hard to preserve our quality of life. But there's something we forget about in Elmhurst. A river runs through it, and it's up to us to protect it. Our storm drains flow to Salt Creek, and that means our harmful waste does too. So try using fewer chemicals on your lawn. Avoid leaking fluids from cars. And grow native flowers and plants to absorb more rainwater. Don't muddy the waters. Do your part to clean up Salt Creek.